J.B. Schmuckler. I spent over half a century trying to convey some important insights into the destructive force at work in our world and its implications for the challenges that we face. Because of my understanding something about the dynamics that have arisen in human civilization, I was able to spot the danger that was rising on the American right, the danger of fascism, at the beginning of the 1990s. But it wasn't until 2004 that I saw it in full, and have spent the last 20 years fighting that fight. And a big part of that fight has been trying to get people in liberal America to see something that's there, that can be shown empirically, nothing supernatural, but something that I like to call a force of evil, and I'm happy to put quotation marks on. And for people like most people with a secular worldview in liberal America, don't like the idea of evil. Okay, it can be called by other names. A force of brokenness, a destructive force, a coherent thing that you can see, that's not just all these different manifestations, but seeing the coherence tells you that there is an it, that it being a kind of a force. And that book back there, The Parable of the Tribes, was the idea that changed the course of my life, and it still looks to me quite valid, and it shows how such a force arises inevitably when a creature steps onto the path of civilization. So that's where I've been coming from for a long time, and I've been developing it. And I have not been I have built something I'm really proud of, but I have been a failure for the most part in trying to get this out there so that it's part of the thinking of our civilization, which I think would have a beneficial effect. But this is a special moment, at least so I'm imagining could be the truth. We in the United States have just had an election which, well, who knows exactly what the consequences are going to be. What we're going to find out. And among the plausible, maybe even probable consequences of this American election, make it, I believe, it could be the most destructive event in all of world history. I don't really know quite how to do that, but let's just take, I think about, like the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany. I think about what are the implications for the world when the Menshevik revolution in early 1917 in Russia got swept away, and the Bolsheviks took over and led to Stalinism and in many ways led to the Cold War. And there are a lot of consequences to that. Maybe that'll be bigger. But what has just happened in America, and we all feel it in our gut, we don't know if American democracy is going to survive. We don't know if what's going to happen with this idea that we've had since, before I was born in 46, the United States is the leader of the free world. We don't know what the implications are going to be for how the world does or does not take responsible action to deal with climate change. There are just going to be potentially so many consequences that you can just sort of see that something has happened, that there's been a victory by a force. Today's Republican Party, led by Donald Trump, who wouldn't say that he wanted to have fascism defeated in the war in Ukraine. who withdrew from the climate change treaty when he was president before, who has indicated his intentions of trampling on the Constitution by using the powers of the presidency the way dictators do, intimidating corporate leaders like Jeff Bezos, and I gather a whole lot of Wall Street was careful not to put itself, they were willing to take collective action, I heard, so that they wouldn't be out there. But they understood that Trump might become president and he might use the presidency in an illegal way to punish them. I mean, he already did some of that. We've already seen that there are so many ways in which he comes into the world to increase conflict, to increase division, never to foster unity in the people, never to inspire cooperative action to make things better. Yeah, you can see that there's going to be more hate and more conflict. But we don't yet know how far that's going to go. But there are a lot of intelligent and insightful people who recognize that there are good reasons to take him seriously on a lot of these things. He's shown us who he is. And it's important to recognize, if we're going to talk about what I think is reasonable to call evil, we're not talking about evil people. I mean, Donald Trump is clearly, as a malignant narcissist, the kind of broken human being that he emerged as out of that broken family that his nieces described so well. He's definitely one of the human beings that on this planet that's making things more broken. But he's only part of a bigger picture. He's just somebody who stands out. And the only reason he stands out was that originally, by 2015, the Republican base was in a frame of consciousness that enabled them to look at Donald Trump, who is already clearly the opposite of the kind of person who should have the powers of the presidency in his hand. But they were already in a place. So that was necessary part of this. Trump had a victory, but it is also the extension of whatever it was that was going on in the Republican base that made them come to a conclusion that would have been unthinkable in conservative America in the age of Eisenhower, the age of Reagan. There are things that are moving here, and you can look at also how the Supreme Court got to be the way it is, and what kinds of forces have been at work, and the nature of the Koch brothers and their ilk in fostering this, and Rupert Murdoch. There's a whole thing that has to be seen in its coherence. And as a guy who ran in 2012 in a district which included, for Congress, included Liberty University, I could see, this toxic form of Christianity was also part of this coherent force. I mean, it has its chunks, but it is sort of like one thing that reinforces itself and moves through the time, gets a Republican base that would choose Donald Trump, that wouldn't mind that it became clear that our major adversary in the world, Vladimir Putin, wanted Trump to be president. Could listen to the Access Hollywood tape that showed that this guy was a monster if he thought that was something to brag about. And yet they advanced the ball and they gave us Trump as the Republican nominee. And then whatever else was going on in the rest of conservative America, it was enough to put him into the White House, where he did a huge amount of damage in a whole lot of ways. I mean, the way the United States looks to the world is very different ever since Donald Trump arose. And even when we had President Biden, people were asking him, yeah, but for how long are you guys here? And now we're not. And maybe that means fascism is going to triumph, and aggression, and the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, and all the ugliness that we've seen in human history getting a chance to have a big victory because of this election. I thought that maybe, since we're looking at that and experiencing the sense of loss, because the side of the good in all these different ways, love versus hate, Kamala's joy versus the grim American carnage stuff, toxic dripping out of Donald Trump's, it could not have been a more blatant contrast, and it couldn't have corresponded more fully to the ancient ways in which good and evil have been conceived. The lies, the truth, the extending a hand, the smiting with a fist, the cultivation of grievance and hatred, the cultivation of love and empathy. We have just passed a huge divide when the American people were presented with such a clear choice. And then they made this choice. Unthinkable not so long ago. But there's been a coherent force that's been working in this direction. And it gives this victory of this clearly broken force, I was hoping might be an opportunity for me to introduce what I call a better human story, a way of understanding the story of our species and our situation at this point in our social evolution, where we might destroy ourselves in not so many generations. Put all that out there because we've just been through something. I still don't know fully how I'm going to be able to deal with a world in which such darkness has been given so much power. But it's important to understand what we're up against. And I recognized it because I have this better human story that shows the nature of the forces at work in our world and the nature of the drama over which is going to control human destiny. So I hope you'll stick with me in this series. And I'm doing it as a series because I understand, A, most people don't want to hear a long video. And B, they're willing to sometime when they already know that they're devoted followers of theirs. And C, I'm still basically a nobody, and I can maybe get you to listen to 10 minutes at a time. But if I did the whole thing, like stood up and gave a lecture and said, this is what's happened to human beings, and this is how to understand the nature of the force that we're up against, and this are the implications of that for how we should fight and win it. That if I give it in bite size, maybe you'll follow along, and ultimately that 1 hour lecture will be delivered in installments. So I'll be back soon, I think, to begin to talk about the way that the drama that's at work in the human world, from this election to the whole conflict between democracy and fascism in our time, to a historic battle over the question of, will the world be characterized by what the Athenians said characterized it? The strong do what they can, while the weak suffer what they must. And then this book explains why that would happen to any creature that takes the unprecedented step of extricating itself from the biological order that had created it by inventing its own way of life. And that when it steps across that threshold, it inevitably unleashes a destructive force. And what we're dealing with is the current manifestation in the United States of something that we should call evil if we accept this as the definition of evil. A coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more broken, or consistently works to make the human world worse. Consistently has a destructive impact on the human world. A coherent force. And in the course of this series, I will show that force. It can be seen. And it is valuable to see it. It would, if we saw it better, we would have a better chance of surviving on this planet as human civilization for the long haul, rather than destroying ourselves, as we very well might with our nuclear weaponry and our bull in a china shop if impact on the Earth's climate system on which we depend for our survival. So I'll be back. I hope you'll stick with me to entry number 2 coming up soon. Thank you.